listen, I'm not making a political statement by just simply saying it's their job to do these things. I think what we have to wrestle with more than anything is our heart attitude toward what we think the civil government ought to be doing and zero back in to say, what does God actually say? And when they do it, we ought to applaud it. Our role is completely different. Our role looks different. And let me just summarize our role from the Bible and from this text in two ways. The first one we see clearly in this text. On a general, normal, peaceful scale, we're to do what 1 Peter says. Normally, in a peaceful declaration of the gospel and the lordship of Christ, we submit ourselves to human institutions. Again, Thomas Schreiner said it this way. Peter gave a command that represents a general truth. That is, he specified what Christians should do in most situations when dealing with governing authorities. Believers should be inclined to obey and submit to their rulers. This is the normal, basically everyday type of submitting in most situations. We should be inclined to obey and submit to our leaders in a way that honors them and fears God. This means that, listen, we must guard what comes out of our mouths. We must guard it from speaking evil of them, speaking evil about their character of which we do not know. It means we should be cautious of what we declare on social media. Can I just give us a little challenge, and this is a big challenge. I don't know how we can stop all the public debate on social media, but can I just tell you something? That if we think something is truly important, the best place to do that conversation is face-to-face. We've got to learn to do better. And as a culture, it is awful. One reason why I don't get on Facebook, I can't stand that open debate. I think it's ridiculous. Because if we're not man-to-man and face-to-face and person-to-person, we will speak very courageously behind a computer screen. And we must be cautious about the things that we declare, as well as, listen, we as Christians should not settle for the backroom jokes about character and policy of our leaders. All the backroom stuff that goes on and all the kind of things that's said, we need to be better than that. We need to be in a way that represents Jesus to our world, honoring them and submitting to them for the Lord's sake in every sphere. In every sphere. In our heart, our attitude, and our words. That's the peaceful role. But there's also another role in the Bible that we've got to be aware of. We find this really laid out in the book of Acts really, really well. When the brothers went out and preached the gospel, and they were arrested. And they were told not to preach about Jesus. You could say anything you want, just don't bring his name into it. And they made a phenomenal statement. They said, listen, if you think it's right, whether or not you think it's right or not, we must obey God rather than man. There is a moment when the church and individuals in the church are to take a prophetic role, whereby we speak and we appeal to our authorities and to all those around us when civil government fails to do its God-given job. We must speak, we must appeal, and we must applaud those who do. When civil government fails to protect, we as God's people must not stay silent. This does not mean that we're disrespectful or we're dishonoring, but we must declare and demonstrate God is our first allegiance, and we owe God honor first, because God is our absolute allegiance. And listen, let's be honest, there are areas in our world where our civil government has failed to protect its people. And it's failed to protect what God has deemed exceedingly valuable, and we as God's people must not stay silent. For instance, our civil government has failed to protect life. It's failed miserably. The millions of babies that have been killed, abortion on demand, euthanasia that's on the rise, capital crimes that will go years without being punished and brought to proper justice, are all ways our civil government has failed to protect life. Therefore, listen, we must not stay silent and just kind of, sirrah, this is the way it is. No, it's failing to protect its citizenry. But our civil government has also failed to protect an institution that God has deemed most precious, and that is marriage and family. Rather, our national leaders have determined that they have the right and they have the authority to declare what a marriage is and what a marriage isn't. Friends, listen, they have no right to do that. Because God on earth, the God of heaven, has already said what is a marriage. It is one man with one woman for one lifetime. When they did this, they operated outside their scope and their authority that God had given them. And listen, God will not be mocked on this issue. And we must not stay silent. That's why we must be okay with taking stands in a moment. It's happening in our own community where one of our a Christian brother or sister owns a business and has said, we will not perform a homosexual wedding here. They're going to court over that issue. It's one reason why we've changed the way that we have done our policies of our building use here. We must be as wise as serpents and as innocent as doves, but we must not stay silent. And our civil government has failed to protect the diversity and the uniqueness of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. Rather, have you noticed what civil government did? Civil government said, no, that's really up for you to decide. It's up to humans to determine whether or not they like the gender status that they have, which we most certainly do not have that authority. God is the one who has determined what we are and who we are. God has determined what makes a man and a woman. And when civil government thinks they have the authority to give that authority to somebody else, they're operating outside their authority. Therefore, we must not stay silent. This does not mean, listen, that we don't love those who are struggling with same-sex attraction. Or it does not mean that we do not love those who have a bent toward wanting to be something other than they are. No, we love them, we care for them, but we also help them understand just because we love you does not mean we can't stand against the government who says, we don't agree with you on this. God does not agree with you on this, and we must not stay silent. Friends, when our civil government tells us what we can and cannot talk about with regard to our faith and with regard to the freedom of speaking out what we believe to be true from the Bible, we must be as the apostles when they said, listen, whether or not you believe this or not to be true, we must obey God rather than man. And sadly, listen, in our world, those are the moments that you're facing. Those are the moments that you face every day in reality, or at any given moment, somebody of hostility could come in just for the point of trying to gain some loophole into the legal system. We were all there. And it's moving there quickly. And we need to be in prayer for these new upcoming cases before the Supreme Court. But we also need to recognize, again, remember, government does not determine our destiny. What we see here is clear. While civil government has a delegated authority from God, it does not have absolute authority. That is reserved for God alone. And when our allegiance to our absolute king, who is God, is challenged or tempted to be usurped by our earthly king, we must obey God rather than man. See, here's the point that I want you to get. I want you to get this really clear. In normal, everyday relations with civil government, we are to be peaceful, live quiet lives, so we can be productive citizens. It's normally every day, for the Lord's sake. But there are moments when we need to be prophetic. And we must not shy away from that moment. But let's be clear, we're not the civil government. Let's be clear on that. In the sense of scope of authority that we have. Our role as people of God is to be peaceful and prophetic and to submit in doing so. We do this so that when we're wrongfully treated and we're wrongfully accused, over time, those people will have their mouths shut and the foolish talk will be stopped. But make no mistake, that can only happen as we do this, submitting ourselves to every human institution for the Lord's sake. So let's just pause here for a moment. What's your attitude toward human institutions? What's your attitude toward submission? See, does your submission reveal the authority of God in your life? Does your submission to human institutions reveal the submission of Jesus? Are there places that you know that you need to speak up rather than stay silent? Or let's put it on the other side. Are there places you need to shut up? See, what's our heart attitude? For the Lord's sake. That's the attitude. We've got to understand the different roles. We have a role, civil government has a role. Next week we'll talk about what's the church's role? What's the corporate work of the church? And how does all that interact? What this will allow you to begin to do is stop chafing all the time. As you trust the absolute sovereign gracious hand of God, who's the one who's called you to submit. And the one who will give you the power and the wisdom to do exactly what you need to do for the Lord's sake. Let's pray.